At this point, I don't share my story too often anymore. So I think I got a little nerves this time.
No, you'll be fine.
And I don't know.
So Amy, you grew up where?
I grew up in Calabasas, California.
Suburb of LA?
Suburb of LA.
Tell me about your family.
I would say I was raised in a single parent household. I think I like to say this because it illustrates my relationship with my mom, but she would tell me eventually that I was conceived the last time my parents had sex, and then their relationship was over. I think they were like separated, and now being divorced, I think I was a last hurrah or something. But so that is to illustrate both my relationship with my mother, very frank and honest when I became an adult. But also my father was never in the picture. I never lived with him. That was the last time.
How many times did you see your dad?
I would say probably about 5 to 10 in my lifetime. A bit more as I got older. After my mom's murder, he attempted to step up, but he was an addict. He was an alcoholic. So his presence in my life was very, very inconsistent. Yeah, he was a lawyer. I definitely knew who he was. I didn't know until I was an adult that he had 50% custody of my brother and I. Yeah, that was an interesting thing to find out because he was so inconsistent and not present. And since sharing my story, actually, somebody that knew both of my parents reached out to me and attempted to deliver a truth to me. He said my mom would sometimes keep us from my father, but I actually had a much more transparent view of that. He would show up drunk at times, and my mom would have to tell him no, he couldn't take us because he was inebriated and couldn't drive us to Orange County from Calabasas.
So your mom was a good parent?
She was a responsible parent. And having been in an abusive relationship with my dad, which I would learn eventually as an adult, not as a child, she was pretty particular in what she would share about my dad. She never tried to talk smack, to talk down about him. She attempted to kind of let us figure him out on our own, which we did very quickly, his inconsistency. And then, I had some very jarring experiences with him in my adulthood that made me lay down some serious boundaries and eventually not see him as well. But yeah, that's, parents are humans.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Just like us. And,
yeah.
And you had a brother as well.
I had a brother. I think yes, much of my life was defined by the people in my family. And I would go on to get my degree in psychology, and I learned that a lot of ourselves, we're defined by our sibling roles just as much as our relationships with our parents too.
Absolutely.
So I had a brother. I have a brother.
Younger?
Older.
3
years older. 2 years, 11 months. So he'll actually be 43 in a couple days.
Tell me about your childhood with your brother.
It was very layered. We moved around a lot. Single mom, Calabasas, that was kind of unheard of. And she was a teacher, so money was tight. Things were inconsistent. So at a point, we would say we were best friends. My brother and I and my mom, and we were a very tight-knit family, but that ended very, very early in his life, I think, and especially mine since he's older. I would say by the time he was 8, we knew that he was different. And the differences would continue to grow and magnify and become different. They would evolve over the years. But the differences kind of began noticing that he was, rather than just shy, as he was when he was younger, he was sullen. He like in fourth grade, had trouble with teachers. He never could not deal with authority. And that was a turning point. School was a point from fourth grade on. He never really fit in. He was highly intelligent, though. So it wasn't like he was incapable or anything. He just could not handle being told what to do in any fashion. And that translated at home. He had an issue. They looked at him a lot at that point, they were thinking perhaps he was oppositionally defiant in terms of oppositional defiant disorder. And that was ruled out. But that was kind of like how he was presenting. Authority was an issue. And so that really formed who I was, I think. I was, I don't know why it makes me tear up, but, and this is a phenomenon I learned, I studied psychology probably to understand and normalize what I had been through and seen. But, I'm going to need some tissues. Forgot about that. Thank you so much. I was compliant and social. Everything Jessie was not, I kind of was. And I don't think that was also just me. But I think I carried a weight to kind of be the good kid, get the grades, figure out my homework and everything on my own. Not that I had to parent myself. My mom was a great parent. I just...
But it was a reaction to his disobedience or...
Disobedience, yeah. Like, even now as adults, there's just there's such a polarity between us. And I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Are we just that way, or is this a result of all the things that have happened in our trajectory? But it's been present ever since the beginning. I loved school. School was my haven. My mom was a teacher, as I said, an LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District teacher. And I get most emotional when I talk about her. Because she really, so much of her was lost to the way she lost her life. And that's one reason I love to share about her and our story, because I'll receive direct messages from people she affected and helped and supported. And it helps me, when you hear a parent's lost their life to the hands of their child, the most common first question I get is what you asked me. Was she your brother was the abusive one? Because you would think there was something.
Yeah. Tell me about your mom.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of person was she?
Well, it's almost her birthday, so I'm really, really happy to be here and honor her. So thank you for asking me about her. She was born in Israel. So she was an immigrant. She was born in 1952. She came over here, I think, by 1960, though. So she grew up largely in Los Angeles. She was firm and loving and caring and thoughtful. Not the funniest or lightest person, but she was so quick to smile. She was the first person to make food for you if you were sick or check on you if you had an issue. She was a really great friend. On her headstone, I put, it's hard to remember the order, but I put mother, mentor, and friend to all, because she really was. All my friends whose parents were disconnected from their child, she would kind of swoop in and give them love. And a lot of my best friends in middle school, we were kind of like the Lost Girls Club. And she was just all, no matter, though we had the smallest house of the bunch,
my friends would want to be there for the most part until Jesse became a larger issue in his behavior. In middle school, I had a best friend who at one point slept over, and Jesse lit a lighter under her butt. Like, I don't know why. There's nothing, I mean, just to catch her off guard. And that was just, it sounds innocuous to a certain point, and it was in the 90s, so it was almost boys will be boys to a certain point. But she was no longer allowed to come over my house because she got scared, and rightfully so. My mom attempted to address it, but by that time, I believe Jesse was about 16, and he was really uncontrollable. And not that my mom believed in controlling per se. I had a lot of freedom, so I had earned those freedoms, though. I mentioned my mom was really loving. She was also, I would say, as an educator and as a parent, old school and new school. And I know I'm hopping around. I'm sorry. It's hard.
So your mom was very caring.
She was.
A very caring person. But
yeah.
Your brother, was he ever diagnosed with anything?
He was. He was diagnosed, as far as I know, as one of the youngest people in America to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder in the, I think, mid to late 90s. A lot of people at that time were in their early 20s at the first onset, like at the earliest cases. And then he also was diagnosed with Tourette's and obsessive compulsive disorder. So those were his 3 diagnoses.
Which a lot of people have those.
A lot of people.
Diagnoses.
I usually follow up when people ask me that question. I will often follow up, but millions of adults in America live with bipolar disorder and do not commit murder. Yeah. I think all of the ingredients in our trajectory at every point, no matter what, when we could have had intervention, the wrong thing happened for us. Jesse started becoming really violent, I think, when he was in about 10th grade. And between the years of like 4th grade and 10th grade, that violent behavior would evolve from like not being able to deal with authority to being verbally abusive. He called me ugly. He would make fun of my height or my stature, or called me Toucan Sam. I had a larger nose. I've had plastic surgery. So it was an environment of definite, like, to a certain degree, emotional and mental torture for a while. And if my mom witnessed it, she would address it, but a lot of times it was very covert. And then he would blackmail me to not say anything. So not only would he harm me, but then he would kind of keep me quiet and gaslight me. We have all these terms now, right? We have all these great ways to understand abuse, but we didn't know that then. Yeah. To say also the violence would continue. I think physical violence doesn't have to be to your body, and his physical violence it was environmental. He started punching holes in walls pretty young too. I would say he was probably about, I don't know, anywhere between 12 and 14 or something for that. Maybe earlier or later, it kind of blurs, but it was just kind of a snowballing and cyclical thing. In that time, he also, in the blackmail and the having me do things that, like, by the time I was in 7th grade, he had started blackmailing me for something small, like something very innocuous that I just, Mom's going to be so mad at you if I won't tell her if you do my chores.
it would evolve into sexual abuse with him. And it was so covert and manipulated. I didn't really realize what it was until he murdered my mom, until I was 22, and everything came crashing down, and I kind of reevaluated our entire lives. And and one of the reasons why I didn't realize what it was or that it happened was he had blackmailed me into basically performing sexual acts on myself in front of him. So he never touched me. And how do you, in the 90s, define sexual abuse without being touched? That wasn't something that was ever, I mean, women are still being fighting to be heard in this realm. Mm-hmm. So at that point, that was never, I never reported it at that time. I never told my mom. That is the one point in my life when people say, do you have any regrets? I don't live with regret, active regret. But when I reflect on that moment or that time in my life, I was about 12 and he was 15 or so, maybe a little younger, 11 and 14. I just regret not telling her because I know she would have acted. She was my protector. She was a great protector. Although it doesn't sound like she protected me. At times in our trajectory later, but she did her very best. So that is, I do regret not reporting that at that time. Or until her murder.
Were there signs of any behavior that would indicate that murder was even on the table?
Yes.
Possibility?
Yeah. As the violence would evolve into, punching holes in walls, eventually it would be, my mom became handicapped at a certain point from a work injury. And at that point, he became violent to her. He would push her. And, when someone is handicapped, that's even more detrimental. Eventually, that physical violence and pushing would evolve. Months before her murder, he took an aerosol can and a lighter and made a homemade flamethrower and attacked her. I wasn't home when that happened. I didn't really see it. I don't know if I don't know if it registered so much violence and there were so many events that I don't think at that moment I had received it in a way like, oh, that's a direct violent threat. Because we were just in survival mode. I had no mode of perspective. I was just surviving. And I now can see that was like the first attempt on her life.
Did your brother have friends?
Yes and no. He had a couple throughout his lifetime. He didn't have a lot. I would say like literally a handful from 0 to 25 when he entered the prison system. I don't know.
That's when he...
That's when he murdered my mom. How did he kill her?
Yeah.
With a knife. He stabbed her. I would find her. He killed her in the kitchen, which was her favorite room. And when I found her, the knife was sticking out of her neck right about here. So as if like a final act. I never saw pictures. Obviously, I saw it in real life. I didn't need to see pictures later. I didn't really want to know exact details. I don't know how many times he stabbed her, but it was egregious. And I know that she had defensive wounds. She did not attack him back or try to harm him. She just begged for her life. Yeah, that is what I know of her murder. I know when I found her, she was in a very large pool of blood. And the phone was just out of her reach of her hand. I could see that.
And there were signs of, like, there were these kind of fights often in the house?
Yes. I wouldn't say often. I would say
inconsistently consistent on that kind of basis where I now know the cycle of abuse, right? I mean, he would love bomb her and tell her, I promise I'm going to get a job. I promise I'm not going to explode. I'm not going to, no more holes punched in the walls. And this is her son telling her this. And he's 22. He's also he was in the military and then dropped out. And he did that twice. Now, I never had confirmation that he was actually in the military and all of this until I shared my story for the first time and someone reached out that had served with him. So I have since confirmed he served in some capacity for at least some portion of time through boot camp. So as he's going in and out of all of these sort of industries and getting spit back out, my mom was calling the cops when things would escalate. And the cops would come and they would retain him for about 24 hours in like the drunk tank in Calabasas, and then they'd give him back to us. So there was no proper like intervention. My mom tried to get him a therapist a few times, but if you don't want to be in therapy, you're not, he would berate the therapist and the therapist would quit on him. So in all of these kind of interventions at every step, it would get worse and worse because I think he was realizing that he was getting away with it more and more.
After he committed the murder, did he get caught right away?
It took about, within hours. Yeah, he had told me the night that he killed her, both my mom and my brother had been calling me a bit on and off. And I had told him I would call him when I was off of work. I did, and he told me not to go home. And I said, why? And after another phone call home and her not picking up, I called him back and he said not to go home because he had killed Mom. So I knew it was him, obviously. I don't think I would have had any question, even if he hadn't admitted that. I went home, I found her. I was already on the phone with the cops. They came, and then because they knew who to look for, within hours they had found him and they arrested him. Yeah, so he did flee. He showered. He found a ride. He didn't have a license or a car. He stole my mom's car, I think, but then I think he knew there was an APB out on it, so he ditched it and got a ride with somebody. And then I think after a standoff, they caught him.
Wow.
Yeah. And although he was obviously admittedly guilty, it would take 4 years to convict him. Yeah.
And he's doing how much time now?
He has now, my mom was murdered on September 25th, 2007. That exact date, like in 2007, actually was the very first day that was honored as the National Murder Victims Remembrance Day. That day she was killed. So he began jail time that day or next day by the hour, the time passed. And then he's been there since. He has now served 17 years. He's been up for parole 3 times in the last... Technically not. He's postponed his parole hearing twice. So there have been 3 kind of parole proceedings over the last 4.5, 5 years. So he had about 13 and a half years in jail/prison before he had his first parole hearing. He has not yet been paroled for it. We have a parole hearing. I say we because it feels like I'm in the parole process too, but June of 2025 will be the next one, and I hope he won't postpone. I don't know if he's allowed to. A lot of questions about the process still exist, but...
But if he does his full term, it would be how many years?
Well, he's technically, he got 15 to life. So technically, the 15 have been served. He does have a new sentence.
He tried to hire somebody in jail before he was convicted to scare me into saying I planned the murder, and then telling that inmate who was getting out of jail, or his wife or something like that, to harm me if I didn't. Nothing happened. That was a threat, but nothing happened from that threat. But he has not stopped his behavior since then. He has been an active threat to me. And then at the parole hearing in 2000, all the years are melding together, but 2021, he threatened my life on the Zoom recorded parole hearing. He very explicitly. And so I attempted to get him a charge for that, and I was not heard for a long time until I found out that Jesse was up for new charges. He had attempted to kill a correctional officer in prison. It was caught on camera, and I got a hold of that DA, and 2 weeks after I got a hold of him, he charged him with a criminal threat against me as well. So Jesse now has 36 more years to life. That is 3 strikes altogether, 1 for my mom's murder, 1 for the criminal threat against me, and 1 for the attempted murder of the officer. He did receive 30 years for that. That's double the time he got for my mom. So he got 15 years to life for my mom's actual murder, and got 30 to life for the attempted murder of a correctional officer, which still breaks my heart. Part of that was that he killed my mom when he was 25 years old and 9 months. That made him a youth offender in California. At 26, if you murder someone, you are no longer a youth offender. But 25 years old and 9 months is still a youth offender. So that youth offender status actually was just taken away in 2023 when he got those new sentences.
What is your take on your brother? I mean, do you just look at, there was nothing in his childhood that might have created this monster?
Nothing, by way of excuse, no. Explanation, maybe a little. I don't think anything makes someone be this except internally. There is a huge chunk of responsibility in each person to do good and do better. But I think he was deeply affected by my parents not being together and my dad's rejection. I never lived with my dad. I never really cared for my dad much. I saw him as a human and not a father, and I think my brother lacked a father. I think that he was picked on a lot, so it's another contributing factor. I think his mental health is another contributing factor.
He was bullied in school?
He was. But in the 90s, they said, put him in karate, toughen him up. And he did. He got a lot tougher, but towards us and towards the outside world. He would have graduated high school in 1999 if they hadn't kicked him out 2 years before. And 1999 was the year that Columbine happened. And I often say that we kind of took the brunt. Our family took the brunt of the violence he would have executed in a larger setting. I think that our story, although it doesn't seem tied to these incidences of mass violence, I think I'm related to someone who was like that. And I think that the warning signs and the pieces of the recipe that make these people that have no connection, that want to cause harm, want to terrorize. I feel like we dealt with domestic terrorism in our home for so many years. I saw that kind of form in my brother. Yeah, and
no relatives, no one in the family who's similar.
No, we have. There's mental. Without giving away medical information, there is definite on my mom's side mental health issues. I would say nowhere close to the degree of my brother. No violent tendencies. My dad, I know, had more violent tendencies, but his, I think, were tied more to his addiction.
And no drugs with your brother?
No, he did at some points. I saw him.
I guess I had always, from movies, thought cocaine went up the nose only, and then I saw him once gum it, and I went, like, everything I learned like that, I think, was either movies or Jesse. He was always also trying to fraud people. He, like, had Chinese elm in our backyard and told me it was marijuana, and he was going to try to sell it as marijuana. I mean, my mom tossed the plant when she found it, but things like that. It was the day of the beginning of Craigslist, and he had obtained absinthe and tried to sell it out of our garage. Like, he couldn't actually adhere to any societal norms. He had to kind of try to make money off of people by, I don't know, frauding them or besting them. And, you know, there's a story I kind of talk about from his childhood from the very beginning, and people will say, when did it start? And I would never have isolated this before without having the rest of his story to tell. But for me, I remember my mom telling me a story of when he was 3, Jesse was 3, and he had asked her if he could draw a treasure map and bring it to the grocery store and sell it to people in the grocery store when my mom was grocery shopping. My mom thought it was super cute and entrepreneurial, and I guess in the 80s it was. But now, looking back and from this perspective upon the rest of his trajectory, I would say that's where he kind of learned he could manipulate people for benefit. And the rest kind of became our history.
And your mom has been gone for how many years now?
17.
And he's been in prison the whole time.
Yeah.
It's got to be terrible too. It's got to be terrible to just to have this memory and
yeah, and I
nothing
don't
you can do about it.
And I don't really think it's like I have this memory and grief and I can move forward. It's also like the legal system and criminal justice system it's really traumatizing to be a part of. And he has had so much power in the process that I think that I don't know if I've ever really had a chance to grieve. I've just been fighting to be heard, in essence, to kind of like, I don't know, if he kills me, then at least I've made a huge trail and help people along the way, I suppose. When I wrote my book and I found the statistic that 50% of American children face sibling abuse, and then I found more statistics saying that up to 60% do, I kind of felt like if I didn't share that, I would be complicit in my brother's actions. So it's like less about putting myself out there and worrying about him harming me and more about me doing good with what's happened. My mom was a teacher at one point in my life. I was a teacher. I feel like it's my onus of responsibility to use our story to teach people the warning signs. I've also learned that as much as domestic violence is an intimate partner violence is a huge issue, child-to-parent violence has increased at a much larger rate in the last few years, and sibling abuse is the most insidious and most prevalent family abuse. So I feel a responsibility to share our story.
All right, Amy, thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you.
Wish you lots of luck.
Thank you.
Sorry about your mom.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me honor her.
Thank you. Even though Soft White Underbelly consists of a lot of videos, it's really still a photography project to me. And if you appreciate the photography, sometimes it's difficult to enjoy it when it's scrolling down the screen, which is the only option I had in this horizontal format on YouTube. So last year we came out with the first Soft White Underbelly book, which is a collection of the best portraits from the thousands of interviews I've done. Each portrait in this book is accompanied by an interesting quote from the person's interview.
Oh my God.
There's more.
Wow. These aren't as bad as I thought. I look like a witch.
I will not be reprinting this book when it sells out. So once it's gone for good. You can order yours at softwhiteunderbelly.org. $125, $150 for a signed copy. And thank you for watching.